A little lost boy discovered a billionaire tied to a tree. What happened next no one expected. A little lost boy discovered a billionaire tied to a tree. What happened next no one expected. Some encounters change everything. Some strangers aren't strangers at all. And some forests hold secrets that billion-dollar empires were built to bury. This is the story of a 4-year-old boy who couldn't read a single word, but somehow read a man's entire soul.
Mister?
Why are you sleeping standing up?
The voice was tiny,
barely above a whisper. But in the dead silence of the Appalachian woods, at 6:47 in the morning, it hit Marcus Hale like a gunshot. His eyes snapped open. A little boy, couldn't have been more than 4 years old, was standing 3 feet in front of him, head tilted sideways, chubby fingers clutching a half-eaten granola bar. He had dirt on his left cheek, mismatched socks pulled up to his knees, and the most fearless brown eyes Marcus had ever seen in his life. Marcus tried to move. He couldn't. His wrists were bound behind the oak tree with zip ties. His ankles were wrapped in rope. His mouth had been taped, but the tape had loosened overnight, probably from the cold sweat that had soaked through every inch of his $4,000 hiking jacket. His phone was gone. His satellite watch was gone. His emergency beacon, the one his security team had insisted he carry, was gone. Everything was gone, except this boy. "I'm not sleeping," Marcus said carefully, keeping his voice low and calm even though his heart was hammering so loud he was sure the kid could hear it. "I'm stuck. Do you know what stuck means?" The boy nodded very seriously. "Like when my shoe gets in the mud." Exactly like that. Marcus exhaled slowly. "What's your name, buddy?"
Eli.
"Okay, Eli. That's a great name. How old are you?" Eli held up 4 fingers, then thought about it, then added a 5th one just to be safe.
4.
"Awesome. Eli, where's your mom or dad? Are they close?" Eli turned around and pointed vaguely into the trees behind him, a direction that told Marcus absolutely nothing. Then Eli turned back around, took a bite of his granola bar, and said with complete calm, "I don't know. I got lost. I followed a butterfly." Marcus Hale, 33 years old, founder and CEO of Hale Technologies, net worth $4.2 billion according to last quarter's Forbes estimate, had negotiated hostile corporate takeovers, survived 2 Senate hearings, and built a company from a college dorm room to a global empire. He had never, in his entire life, felt as helpless as he did right now. "Eli, listen to me very carefully," Marcus said, keeping his voice steady. "I need you to do something very brave. Can you be brave?" Eli puffed up his small chest. "I'm very brave. I touched a worm before." "That is brave. Okay. I need you to walk that way." Marcus tilted his head to the left, toward where he could faintly hear what sounded like a trail marker creek he'd crossed yesterday afternoon, before everything went wrong. "And find a grown-up. Any grown-up. A hiker, a ranger, anybody."
"Can you do that?"
Eli considered this with the gravity of a tiny philosopher. Then he said something Marcus did not expect. "I'll go find help. But first you should know," he pointed past Marcus's shoulder, deeper into the dark trees behind him. "There are 2 men back there. They were watching you sleep. But they left when they heard me coming." Marcus's blood went cold. He forced his face to stay calm. "Which way did they go?" Eli pointed north, away from the trail, which meant they weren't gone. They were circling. "Eli," Marcus said, his voice dropping to just above a whisper, "I need you to run, not walk.
Run.
That way. Don't stop. Don't look back. Find somebody right now." For the first time, Eli looked scared. His bottom lip trembled the way 4-year-old lips do right before tears arrive. "Will you be okay?" Eli asked. And Marcus Hale, a man who hadn't cried since his mother's funeral 6 years ago, felt something crack open in the middle of his chest. "I'm going to be fine," he said. "But I need you to be my hero right now. Can you do that?" Eli wiped his nose with the back of his hand, straightened up, gripped his granola bar like a weapon. "Okay," he said. "I'll save you." Then he turned and ran into the trees. Marcus watched him disappear. Then he dropped his head back against the rough bark of the oak and started working his wrists against the zip tie, faster now, harder, ignoring the burn because he now had 12 hours of his own story to think about, and none of it was good. It had started the night before. Marcus had insisted on the solo hike. His security team, led by Daniel Reeves, 15 years in private protection, had pushed back hard. They always did. But Marcus had been suffocating under the weight of everything for months. The acquisition deal that was bleeding out. The whistleblower lawsuit that had somehow leaked to 3 different journalists. The board breathing down his neck. His little sister Kara, who hadn't spoken to him in 8 months. He needed one night. Just one night alone in the woods to think. Daniel had reluctantly agreed. They'd set up a perimeter camp 2 miles out. Marcus would hike the ridge trail, set up his own small camp at the overlook, and be back by sunrise. He'd made it to the overlook just fine. Ate his packaged dinner. Watched the sun go down over the valley like an oil painting. Then, around 10 p.m., someone had knocked him unconscious from behind. He'd woken up in the dark, zip-tied to the tree, with no gear, no phone, and a note that had been tucked into his jacket pocket. He'd twisted and strained until he could just barely reach it, and in the faint moonlight he'd read 6 words that told him everything. "We know what you did, Marcus." He'd been holding those 6 words in his chest ever since. Because the thing was, there were at least 3 different people who might have written them. 3 different secrets. 3 different sins. And he genuinely didn't know which one had finally caught up with him. A man with $4.2 billion has a lot of skeletons. The trick is keeping the closets locked. Someone had gotten a key. He'd been working his wrists for an hour when he first heard Eli's voice. The zip ties had barely loosened. His hands were starting to go numb. And now, with the knowledge that whoever had tied him here was still in the woods, watching, waiting, circling, the math of his situation was getting very bad very fast. He didn't know if Eli would find help in time. He didn't know if the 2 men in the trees were armed. He didn't know which secret had broken the lock. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty, pressed against that old oak tree in the cold morning light of the Appalachian woods. If that little boy somehow saved his life today, Marcus Hale was going to have to become a completely different man. Because the man he was right now, he deserved to be tied to the tree. The forest had gone completely silent. Somewhere behind him, a branch snapped. They were coming back. "He's not going anywhere, Ray. Calm down." "I am calm. What I'm not is patient. We gave him the night to think. The night's over." Raymond Cho, 41, former financial analyst, currently the angriest man in 3 states, pushed a low pine branch out of his face and stepped into the small clearing where his partner was crouching over a camping stove making coffee like they were on a recreational weekend. His partner. That was a generous word for Kevin Marsh. Kevin was 38, wore a fleece vest over everything including his soul, and had the unnerving ability to seem completely relaxed during situations that were objectively not relaxing. "Someone was here," Kevin said, not looking up. Small footprints. Tiny, like a child. Ray's head snapped toward the ground. He followed Kevin's gaze to the soft mud near the tree's roots, and yes, there they were. Small sneaker prints, pointed east, running pattern, light and fast. "A kid," Ray said flatly. "There was a kid here." "Yep. A kid who saw our guy tied to a tree." "Yep." Kevin poured his coffee into a metal cup. "And who is now presumably running to find an adult." Ray stood very still for 3 full seconds. "Kevin," he said slowly, "this changes everything." "It changes the timeline," Kevin corrected calmly. "It doesn't change the goal." "It absolutely changes the goal. We can't. This wasn't supposed to involve a civilian, let alone a child. Do you understand what happens if—" "Ray." Kevin finally looked up. His eyes were completely steady. Sit down. I don't want to sit down. I know. Sit down anyway. Ray sat down on a fallen log because Kevin had a way of saying things that made you do them before your brain caught up with your body. Kevin wrapped both hands around his coffee cup. We are not criminals. We have a man zip-tied to a tree in a national forest. We have a man zip-tied to a tree in a national forest who stole $400 million from people who trusted him, which makes us, at worst, aggressively motivated journalists. Ray stared at him. We are not journalists. You keep saying that. Investigative citizens, then. Kevin took a long sip. The point is, we didn't hurt him. We're not going to hurt him. We are going to walk back up to that tree in 10 minutes, give Marcus Hale a very simple choice, and then cut him loose. That was always the plan. A child finding him first doesn't change the plan. It changes the urgency. Ray rubbed his face with both hands. He had a wife. He had a 7-year-old at home. He had spent the last 14 months of his life consumed by one thing, finding proof of what Marcus Hale had done, and he was so close, so impossibly close, that he let Kevin talk him into this stunt when he should have known better. What's the choice we're giving him?
Ray said.
Remind me, because right now I feel like I need to hear it out loud. Kevin set down his coffee. He signs the statement. Full confession, notarized via the digital signature we have set up on the tablet, admitting to the rerouting of the charitable trust funds, the falsified 990 forms, and the deliberate liquidation of the pension accounts for the Meridian employees before the bankruptcy filing. He signs it. We cut him loose. We hand the statement to the 3 journalists who are waiting for our call, and it goes public before noon. Ray was quiet. Or, he said. Or, he doesn't sign. We cut him loose anyway because we are not killers, Ray, and we never were. And we accept that we failed. And $400 million stays buried. And 1,100 Meridian families spend the rest of their lives wondering what happened to their retirement. The forest sat in silence around them. 1,100 families. Ray knew all of them. Not personally, but he'd read their stories. He'd built a spreadsheet. Names, ages, how many years they'd worked before Meridian collapsed. He had a retired teacher from Ohio, 62 years old, who was currently working night shifts at a gas station. He had a warehouse manager from Georgia, 58, who'd had to pull his son out of college. He had a woman named Deborah Walsh, 71, who'd sent Ray a handwritten letter that he still carried in his coat pocket. I just want someone to tell the truth, Deborah had written. I'm not even angry anymore. I'm just tired. Okay, Ray said quietly. 10 minutes. 10 minutes, Kevin agreed. They sat in the woods, 2 men who had crossed a very serious line for what they absolutely believed was a righteous reason, and drank their coffee in silence. Neither of them had any idea that 3 miles east, a 4-year-old named Eli had just burst out of the tree line onto a paved park road, run directly into the legs of a national park ranger named Sandra Okafor, grabbed her by the hand with both of his, and said, with complete breathless urgency, "There's a man tied to a tree, and you have to come right now." Back at the oak, Marcus had made progress. His left wrist had finally worked through the zip tie enough that the plastic was cutting into his skin, but the cutting was actually helping, creating a groove, weakening the plastic incrementally every time he twisted. His hands were bleeding. He couldn't feel his fingertips. He didn't stop, because he was thinking about the note. We know what you did, Marcus. And thinking about who had written it had led him, in the long dark hours of the night, to the same answer over and over again. Meridian. The acquisition he'd buried in a shell company 3 layers deep. The pension accounts he'd signed off on liquidating, technically legal, structured to look like standard bankruptcy procedure, but chosen specifically because it protected Hale Technologies' exposure at the cost of everyone else's. 1,100 people. He'd approved it in a 20-minute meeting and then flown to Tokyo for a product launch the same afternoon. He'd thought about it twice since then.
Twice.
In 3 years. We know what you did, Marcus. Yeah, he thought, his wrists burning, his shoulders screaming. the morning light starting to filter gold through the trees. You and me both. Sandra, say that again. Slowly. I have a 4-year-old child, Ranger Kaplan. He says there's an adult male tied to a tree approximately 1.5 miles northwest of the Ridge 7 marker. He says there were 2 men watching. I need backup and I need it now. A pause on the radio. Long enough to make Sandra Okafor's jaw tighten. Is the child injured? Negative. He's scared but he's okay. He says the man told him to run and find help. Another pause. Copy that, Sandra. Sending Kaplan and Torres your way. ETA 12 minutes. Keep the child calm and do not approach the scene alone. Sandra clicked off the radio and crouched down to Eli's level. He was still holding her hand. Both hands, actually, wrapped around 2 of her fingers, grip surprisingly strong for someone so small. He'd eaten the last of his granola bar during the radio call and was now looking at her with the focused intensity of someone who had taken on a personal mission and intended to see it through. Are they coming? Eli asked. They're coming, Sandra said. You did amazing, buddy. You did everything right. I ran the whole way, Eli said proudly. I didn't look back. I know. I could tell. Sandra pulled a bottle of water from her belt kit and handed it to him. Eli, can you tell me, the man tied to the tree, did he tell you his name? Eli thought about it, lips pressed together. Marcus. Sandra went still. She'd been a national park ranger in the Appalachian Preserve for 9 years. She'd dealt with lost hikers, injured climbers, a drowning once, a bear situation that she still didn't like to talk about at dinner parties. She'd never once had a situation where the name of a distressed adult immediately triggered a memory this specific. But 3 days ago, she'd seen a name on an interagency courtesy notice her supervisor had forwarded from state police. A note that a private security team had flagged a high-profile individual for a solo hike in the preserve. The name on the notice had stuck in her head because she'd seen it recently in a different context entirely. Her husband was a pension lawyer. He'd been working a Meridian case for 7 months. He'd mentioned Marcus Hale at dinner approximately 30 times. None of the 30 times had been complimentary. Sandra stood up slowly, heart doing something complicated in her chest, and looked northwest into the trees. Eli, she said carefully, the 2 men you saw near him, what did they look like? Eli scrunched his face in concentration. One was tall. One had a fuzzy vest. They weren't being mean. They were just standing there. Did they seem angry?
No. He thought about it.
They seemed sad, actually. Sandra absorbed that. Then her radio crackled. Sandra, this is Torres. We're at Ridge 7. Guide us to your position. She gave them her coordinates. Then she looked down at Eli, who was still watching her with those serious brown eyes, and she made a decision that was probably outside her official job description but felt, in that moment, completely necessary. Eli, she said, I'm going to ask you to stay right here by this road marker until another ranger comes to sit with you.
Can you do that?
Are you going to go help Marcus? Yes. Eli nodded gravely. Tell him I'm okay. He was worried about me. Sandra felt something move through her chest, quick and sharp, like a current. A 4-year-old boy, completely lost in the woods, worried about the adult he'd found instead of himself. I'll tell him, she said. She jogged northwest into the trees. She found Marcus Hale at 7:23 a.m. He was still tied to the tree, but his left hand was almost free. She could see the blood and the raw skin, and the way he'd been working the zip tie methodically, rationally, without panic. When he heard her footsteps, he turned toward them with his whole body, and for just a moment, before he recognized her uniform, his face showed something raw and unguarded.
Fear.
Real fear. Not the boardroom kind. Then he saw the ranger badge, and something in his eyes reset. Are you alone? He said immediately. His voice was hoarse but controlled. Backup is 2 minutes behind me. Are you injured? My hands. Nothing serious. The boy, Eli, is he? He's safe. He found me. He's on the road. Marcus closed his eyes. Just for a second. One breath. He said to tell you he's okay, Sandra added. He said you were worried about him. Marcus opened his eyes. He looked at the sky through the canopy of oak leaves, and Sandra, who was trained to read distress in human faces, watched something happen on his that she couldn't fully name. It was too complicated for one word. Grief and relief, and something older than both. She cut his left wrist free, then moved to the ropes at his ankles. There were 2 men, he said. They may still be. We're treating it as an active scene. Do you know who they were? A pause. The kind of pause that lasted exactly long enough to mean something. No, Marcus said. Sandra looked up at him from where she was crouching at his ankles. He didn't look away. She finished cutting the rope. Stood up. Mr. Hale, she said quietly. My husband is a pension attorney. He's been working the Meridian case. Marcus said nothing. I'm going to do my job today exactly the way I'm supposed to, Sandra said. And then I'm going to go home tonight, and I'm going to have dinner with my husband. And he's going to ask me how my day was. She handed him the cut rope to hold, something for his unsteady hands to grip. I haven't decided yet, she said, what I'm going to tell him. She turned toward the sound of her backup crashing through the brush. Marcus stood against the tree, free now, legs barely holding him, and realized that the scariest thing that had happened to him in these woods wasn't the zip ties. It was the way that Ranger had looked at him, like she already knew, like maybe everyone already knew, and had just been waiting for the right moment. We weren't trying to hurt you, Mr. Hale. We want you to understand that. You tied me to a tree. We zip-tied you to a tree. There's a distinction. Is there? Raymond Cho and Kevin Marsh had walked out of the woods on their own. That was the part nobody expected. When Ranger Torres and 2 state police officers had approached from the north, weapons not drawn but hands ready, the 2 men had been standing 20 yards from the oak tree, in plain sight, hands visible, with a folded document and a tablet computer sitting on a flat rock between them like evidence voluntarily submitted. We'd like to speak with Mr. Hale, Kevin had said, before anyone makes any decisions about what happened here. They'd been cuffed. Not roughly. The officers had been professional. But they'd been cuffed and walked to the ranger station, and somehow, through Sandra Okafor's quiet insistence and a chain of phone calls that Marcus couldn't fully track in his exhausted state, everyone ended up in the same room by 10 a.m. Marcus.
Kevin. Ray. Sandra.
A state police detective named Briggs who had the energy of a man who'd already had a very long day, and it wasn't even noon. And on the table, the tablet, the document, and a USB drive that Kevin had produced from his vest pocket and placed beside them with the careful deliberation of someone making an offering. Talk, Detective Briggs said. Kevin talked. It took 40 minutes. Ray added details when Kevin left gaps. Marcus sat across from them and listened and didn't deny a single thing, which was itself a kind of answer. The outline was this. Raymond Cho had been a mid-level analyst at Meridian Financial Services until 3 years ago, when the company had collapsed under a bankruptcy filing that was, on paper, a standard Chapter 11 restructuring. He'd lost his own modest pension. More than that, he'd understood because of his position exactly what the numbers meant. He'd watched the 990 forms. He'd traced the charitable trust fund disbursements. He'd found the shell company. He'd taken it to 2 lawyers, both of whom had told him the technical legal exposure was minimal. He'd taken it to 3 journalists, none of whom could get editorial approval without a direct statement. He'd found Kevin Marsh, a former corporate accountability investigator, currently freelance, currently very interested in the Meridian case, through a mutual contact 14 months ago. Together, they'd built a 340-page documented case. Everything legal. Everything provable. And then they'd hit the same wall everyone hit. Without a primary source, without Marcus Hale or someone directly in his decision chain making a statement, the story was unpublishable. Too many lawyers. Too much liability. Too much money on the other side. So you kidnapped me, Marcus said. We created a situation, Kevin said carefully, in which you had time to think. Without your phone, without your lawyers, without your PR team. Just you and a question. He nodded at the note, which Sandra had bagged but which was still visible. We thought 24 hours might be clarifying. It was 16 hours, Marcus said. A child accelerated the timeline. Silence. Marcus looked at the tablet on the table. The document was still there, the statement, pre-written, waiting for a signature.
He looked at Ray.
Ray was looking back at him with an expression that had nothing left in it except tired truth. No hatred. No satisfaction. Just 1,100 families and a retired teacher working night shifts and a woman named Deborah Walsh who was tired of waiting. You could have published without me, Marcus said. The 340 pages. Wouldn't survive the legal assault, Kevin said. We've been through this. We needed a statement. We needed your voice. Why would I give you that? Ray leaned forward. Because a 4-year-old kid who couldn't read your name off a Forbes list ran through 1.5 miles of woods to save you this morning. And you let him do it. You sent him out there alone and scared because it was the only play you had. And while he was running, Ray's voice stayed steady with visible effort. I want you to think about what you were thinking about. The room was quiet. Marcus thought about the tree, about the bark against his back, about the 6 words in his pocket. About 3 years and a 20-minute meeting and Tokyo the same afternoon. About Deborah Walsh, who he did not know, who had written I'm just tired. He looked at the document. I want 2 things, he said. Briggs straightened. Kevin's expression didn't change. Ray blinked. A lawyer in this room before I sign anything, Marcus said. A real one.
Mine.
Today. That's fair, Kevin said. And I want to meet Eli. The room went completely still. His parents, Marcus said. Whatever family he's with. I want to meet them before I leave today. He stopped. Looked at his hands, still wrapped in Sandra's field bandaging, streaked with dried blood and rope burn. I just need to see that he's okay. Myself. Sandra, who had been standing against the wall in the corner, spoke for the first time. His grandmother is in the waiting room, she said. She's been here for an hour. She's the one who reported him missing at 6 a.m. They'd been camping at Site 12. She can come in? Marcus asked. Sandra looked at Briggs. Briggs made a face that suggested this was already the strangest case of his career, and it was apparently going to get stranger. Sure, Briggs said. Why not? Eli's grandmother was 64 years old, 5'2", and walked into that room like she owned the building. Her name was Patricia. Her last name was Walsh. Deborah Walsh was her older sister. Marcus Hale discovered this 8 minutes into the conversation, and nobody in that room, not Kevin, not Ray, not Briggs, not Sandra, was fully prepared for what happened to his face when he did. You're crying. I'm aware. Grown-ups don't usually cry in front of me, except Grandma, but only at church. Eli Walsh had been given a juice box and a package of crackers by the ranger station admin and was sitting in a chair that was too big for him, legs swinging, watching Marcus Hale with the objective curiosity of a 4-year-old who had already decided this was a very interesting day. Marcus was sitting across from him. They'd been left alone for 5 minutes. Patricia was on the phone with her daughter, Eli's mom, assuring her that Eli was fine and that today's events were complicated, and I'll explain later. Marcus had not planned to cry. It had happened when Patricia Walsh, a retired school administrator, composed, sharp-eyed, deeply suspicious of Marcus in a way she'd made no effort to hide, had mentioned her sister Deborah's name in a sentence that went, Deborah spent 31 years at Meridian. She was 6 months from full pension when it all fell apart. She's 71 now, and she still works nights. That was all. Marcus hadn't said anything. He'd just stopped. Everything had just stopped, and then something had cracked open that he'd been keeping closed for 3 years, and now he was sitting in a plastic chair in an Appalachian Ranger station with tears running down his face, and a 4-year-old examining him with scientific interest. Does it hurt? Eli asked. What? Eli pointed at Marcus's bandaged hands. Oh, Marcus looked down.
Yeah.
A little. I got hurt once, Eli offered. I fell off the porch. I cried a lot. That sounds reasonable. Grandma said it's okay to cry. She said it means something matters. Marcus looked at the boy. This small, dirt-smudged, entirely accidental hero who had followed a butterfly into the woods and changed the direction of Marcus Hale's life without having any idea that was what he was doing. Your grandma sounds smart, Marcus said. She knows everything, Eli agreed seriously, except how to work the TV remote. She always asks me. Something moved through Marcus that was almost a laugh. Not quite, but close.
Eli, he said.
I need to tell you something, and I need you to not worry about it because it's adult stuff. But I still want to say it. Eli nodded with immense gravity. What you did this morning, finding help, running when I asked you to, that was one of the bravest things I've ever seen. And I've seen a lot of things. Marcus paused. You didn't know me. You didn't know if I was a good person. But you helped me anyway. Eli tilted his head. Were you scared? Very.
Me too, Eli said.
But you said be brave. So I was. Marcus absorbed that. You said be brave. So I was. He thought about Deborah Walsh, working the night shift at 71. He thought about 1,100 people who had trusted a system he'd helped hollow out from the inside. He thought about a 20-minute meeting and Tokyo the same afternoon. He thought about what it meant to say be brave and then actually do it. Not the kind of brave that costs you nothing. The other kind. He stood up, steadied himself, walked to the door, and opened it. Detective Briggs, Kevin, Ray, Patricia, and Sandra were all in the hallway in a rough cluster that suggested they'd been listening to every word. Marcus looked at Kevin. Call whoever you need to call, he said. Get the document. Get a notary on video conference. My lawyer can verify it's acceptable. He paused. And I want to be the one to call the journalists. I want to make a statement directly. Not just the document. My voice. On record. Ray stared at him. All of it. Ray said. All of it. Kevin and Ray looked at each other. A long look. The look of two men who had spent 14 months on an impossibility and were now standing on the other side of it and not entirely sure what to do with their hands. Okay, Kevin said quietly. There's a condition, Marcus said. Everyone tensed. The statement includes a commitment to restitution. Full restitution to every Meridian pension holder paid out of my personal holdings, not the company's. It'll take time to structure, but it goes in the statement as a binding pledge. He looked at Patricia Walsh. Starting with the people who were closest to retirement. Starting with the people who waited the longest. Patricia looked at him for a long time. My sister, she said, doesn't want your money, Mr. Hale. I know, Marcus said. But she deserves it. There's a difference. Patricia's jaw tightened. Then, slowly, she nodded. Marcus turned back to the room, to the hallway, to the strange assembled jury of people who had been present for the unplanned demolition of the life he'd built. Then Eli appeared at his elbow, having slipped off the big chair without anyone noticing, and took Marcus's bandaged hand in both of his small ones. Are you going to be okay now?
Eli asked.
Marcus looked down at him.
Yeah, he said.
And meant it for the first time in years. I think I am. What do you want to do with the rest of it? The rest of what? The rest of the billions, Marcus. The part that isn't restitution. The part that's just you. It was 6 months later. October. The same Appalachian Preserve, but the Ridge Trail this time, the actual trail, in the afternoon light, with permission and planning and a security team that was a reasonable compromise between Marcus's need to breathe and Daniel Reeves's need to sleep at night. The person asking the question was Cara Hale, Marcus's younger sister. 30 years old, graphic designer, the only person in his life who had always called things exactly what they were. She hadn't spoken to him for 8 months before everything broke open in that ranger station. She'd called him 2 days after the story went public. Not to say she'd known, or that she'd suspected, but to say, simply, I'm glad you told the truth.
I need some time. But I'm glad. Time had passed. She was here now.
They walked the ridge trail in the autumn quiet, leaves going gold and red around them, and Marcus told her everything he hadn't told the journalists. Not the Meridian details, those were public record now, the subject of 3 major investigative features and 2 pending regulatory reviews. But the other things, the 20-minute meeting, Tokyo the same afternoon, the 2 times he'd thought about it in 3 years. Kara listened. She didn't say much. When he finished, she asked the question, "What do you want to do with the rest of it?" Marcus thought about it for a long time. Long enough that they reached the overlook, the exact spot where he'd eaten a packaged dinner and watched the sun go down 6 months ago, before everything changed.
The view was the same.
Wide valley, rolling hills, October haze. "I want to do something real," he said. "Not a foundation with my name on it. Not a press release about giving back. Something that actually does something. With people who know what they're doing and don't need me to be in charge of it." Kara was quiet for a moment. "Ray and Kevin," she said. "You know they're starting an accountability nonprofit. Corporate pension protection. They need funding." Marcus had heard. He'd been thinking about it. "They probably don't want it from me," he said.
"Ray doesn't," Kara said. "Kevin called me last week.
He said, and I'm quoting, 'The man zip-tied himself to the right tree.'" Marcus almost laughed. "Completely this time." "What about the company?" Kara said. "Board is restructuring. I'm stepping back from day to day. There are people who can run it better than I can right now, and they've always known it."
He paused.
"I'll stay involved, but differently." Kara nodded slowly. Then, "And Eli?" Marcus reached into his jacket pocket, pulled out a photo, printed, not on his phone. A picture Patricia Walsh had texted him and he'd had printed because he wanted to hold it in his hands. Eli, sitting on his grandmother's porch, granola bar in one hand, the most self-satisfied expression a 4-year-old could produce on his small face. Patricia had texted it with a single caption. He told his whole preschool class he saved a man from a forest.
"His teacher called me."
"I've been in touch with Patricia," Marcus said. "Eli's mom, too. They're letting me, it's nothing official. I just want to make sure."
He stopped.
Started again. "He starts kindergarten next year. I asked if I could do a college fund. Patricia argued with me for 45 minutes about it." "Did she say yes?" "She said, 'Fine. But don't think this means we like you.'" Kara pressed her lips together in the way that meant she was trying not to smile. "And Deborah Walsh?" she said. Marcus folded the photo carefully, put it back in his pocket. "She sent me a letter," he said. "Handwritten. Actual letter in the mail." Kara waited. "She said she didn't forgive me yet," Marcus said. "She said she might not for a long time, and she wasn't going to pretend otherwise." He paused. "But she said she noticed that I'd told the truth.
And that it mattered.
Not because it fixed things, but because she'd stopped believing anyone like me was capable of it." The valley stretched out below them. A hawk moved in long, slow circles somewhere above the tree-line. "She asked one thing," Marcus said. "What?" "She asked me to remember her name." His voice was steady. "Careful," she said. "Remember my name, Marcus. Not as a lesson or a story you tell to seem changed. Just remember it." She said, "I'm a person. I existed before you, and I'll exist after you, and I'd like someone in your position to know that." The wind moved through the leaves. "Do you?" Kara asked quietly. "Remember it?" "Deborah Walsh," Marcus said. 71. 31 years at Meridian. Worked the night shift. Has a sister named Patricia and a great-nephew named Eli who follows butterflies into forests and saves strangers. He looked at the valley. "I'm not going to forget it," he said. "I'm not going to make it a story. It's a person. It's real. I think that's where you start." Kara stood beside him for a moment. Then she reached over and put her hand on his arm, briefly, the way you do with someone you've been worried about for a long time and are just starting to stop worrying about. "Okay," she said. "Okay," he said. They stood at the overlook as the October light turned everything gold. Two siblings. One complicated truth. A valley full of ordinary life going on without anyone's permission. Somewhere in a ranger station file, a small sneaker print in the mud of an Appalachian forest had already faded from evidence to memory. But Eli Walsh would start kindergarten in September. And his tuition, from preschool to college graduation, had been paid. And Deborah Walsh had, for the first time in 3 years, been able to reduce her night shifts to 2 per week, not because the money had fixed what was taken, but because someone had finally given her enough ground to stand on. And Marcus Hale had taped a handwritten letter to the wall above his desk, where the Forbes profile used to be, and he read the last 2 lines of it every morning before he started his day. I'm not angry anymore. I'm just tired, but not as tired as I was. Sometimes a child who can't read a single word is the only one who can see the whole story. And sometimes getting tied to a tree is the only way a man learns to stand up straight. And